Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first BSI Built Environment webinar of 2024. For those of us who have not met before, my name is Ant Bird, and I'm Head of Built Environment within Knowledge Solutions in BSI, and it's my privilege to be your host for today's webinar session. Today, we're going to be looking at a bit of a backward look at 2023 and what it held for us, but perhaps now more importantly, what's 2024 looking like and what's BSI going to be up to in the field of the built environment sector. In this session, I'll be joined by my built environment team colleagues, Claire, Dan and Ian, and they will introduce themselves as their slides come up as we progress through today's webinar. Next slide, please. For those of you that have joined us before, this will be all known to you, I'm sure. Today's session is very much a listen-only webinar, but it is being recorded. We really do welcome your questions via the Q&A function. For us, this is really important to ensure interaction. And if you've got a burning question that you want to ask, please submit it, and they will come directly through to me here on my second screen. So please submit those questions. If you have any technical difficulties, by the same case, submit any concerns you may have or any problems by the same Q&A function, and our great events team will pick that up and hopefully get you sorted and back on with us on the webinar straight away. Upon completion of the feedback survey, which we always ask of you, we will of course send you a link to the recording of the webinar. We really do need the feedback. For us to run these events, we need your insight and your requests as to what you want to hear about and why. I'll touch upon some of our webinars that we've got lined up later this year towards the end, but as part of the feedback, give us your thoughts, but also your thoughts about where else we should be lifting the lid and exploring a few areas. As I said, this is a CPD recognised webinar, and keep that feedback coming back. Please give us the feedback. There is a handout on the Q&A function box that you'll find there as well, if you would help to use a captions approach to listening to this GoToWebinar, and there's a handout for you to read to how you can turn on the captions therein. Okay, that's enough of the housekeeping. Let's get into a bit more of the detail. Just as a way of a bit of a background from a BSI perspective, I'm sure many of you will be aware of this, but it is worth just repeating. We are BSI, the British Standards Institution, a Royal Charter organisation. We are appointed by the government as the UK's national standards body. Okay, we have an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with government, setting out what it is we do in our role as the UK's NSB. A précis of what that sort of contains is taken from our articles. And the primary drive is to coordinate the efforts of companies and persons for the improvement, standardization and simplification of materials, products and processes, and of systems for the management of business, safety, technology, services and the environment. So very broad. Of course, we're here today talking about built environment, but we are but one part of that, but one sector. When we talk about the BSI group, it is very large. I wasn't quite sure how large it was till I actually joined, if the truth be known, because as I described at the start, we're here in terms of really the national standards body. And so myself and my colleagues who you'll hear from shortly, we sit within standards knowledge or knowledge solutions. That's part of the NSB, the national standards body as well. But the actual group of BSI is much larger. There are 5,000 plus colleagues that we have in the wider part of group. We clearly have a line of delineation and a code of conduct between us as the NSB and the wider group, because we as the NSB serve all parties in the UK, other test houses, other certification bodies, and that's really important. So you have knowledge solutions, you then have advice and consulting, which can go quite broad within our wider group, and then you have assurance, such as voluntary certification, the likes of Kite Mark and similar, and then you have regulatory, mandatory certification, maybe the construction products regulations and how that's been revised, but maybe medical devices too. So it's a big entity, but we sit within the standards component of BSI. Next slide, please. And again, always worth reminding ourselves in terms of what are standards. Standards are simply consensus tools that are used around the world to support companies and people to build trust and improve performance. We do that through specifications, test methodologies and classifications, codes of practice, guides, processes and frameworks. They are in effect a language, they help with interoperability, and they provide ultimately, when we look around the globe, we try to provide a bit of a springboard from our standards for UK products and services as well. And so, it's the handshake, it's the engagement, it's the working together. This is what good looks like. Next slide, please. So, as I've touched upon already, we sit within Knowledge Solutions and we are a sector team. Our broad role, we were set up about 4 years ago, is to take strategic leadership of our sectors. We use our insight and channel our expert knowledge to shape and position standards, products and services that benefit our stakeholders. We're there for you. We support industry, government, and other internal and external stakeholders in BSI. It's a very big group, trying to make sure that we offer services and standards and guidance that is much needed. We work with our strategic sector committees, and our committees and our all-important committee experts are key to what we do, and they have a number of advisory groups where they tell us what else is needed and where we might need to look. Because the built environment sector is very, very established, there's not much necessarily in deep white space, but there are still things and areas we need to go and move and support. We're here to establish strategic UK and international partnerships, and no matter what you listen to on the news or what you might think at times, we are very important in the UK, and our services are much sought around the world, certainly in the built environment sector. And yes, we are there to build and maintain the BSI brand, but from the perspective of supporting UK and UK stakeholders. We need understanding about current and future market drivers in the key sectors, and we can communicate that around BSI, because there are things that we can do, but there might be other things that other parts of the group can do too. We have a very large training arm, for example. We have 7 sector teams. You're going to hear from us today in built environment, but we have digital, energy, ESG, food, health, care, and transport and mobility. And it's fair to say we're working forever more closely with one another. Energy, ESG, digital, very horizontal, but we still have massive crossovers with transport and mobility. And then, for example, the hospital program with healthcare. Built environment is key, and I would say it's one of the most important sectors, if not the, but I would say that. Next slide, please. So that's a bit of background, and then I want to take you in a very quick canter through the built environment sector as we see it, touching upon what's happened in 2023. And then really for the mainstay of the session today, we're going to hear from my built environment sector colleagues on their particular areas and thematics, whether it be sustainability, digital and well-being, health and safety. But we'll cover that in a moment. Next slide, please. So when we sit back and we think back, and 2024 started apace, I can't quite believe we're now right at the end of January. What did 2023 actually hold for us moving into 2024? Well, for a sector, it held an awful lot. We'd already seen the Building Safety Act 2022. Obviously, that came out, developed through the bill, came out the year before. But what we started to see was the supporting regulations come into force for that particular primary piece of legislation. From my background, I'm a former building control officer. I was a government regulator in the built environment space from a building regs perspective. There is no doubt this is the biggest wholesale changes we've ever seen at a regulatory level, certainly in the last 50 years when it comes to building regulations. There's lots of new activity, there's lots of actions, and the need to think about registration of building control, the need for professional competency, and some definitive guidance about high risk buildings. But let's be quite clear, this new act and the supporting regulations apply to all building work and buildings, not just HRBs. A big component, we've got a picture there of Paul Morrell, OBE, is construction products. There are many pieces of the puzzle that have now been published and come into force for the building safety regime, but we are still waiting for more to come in this coming April, and we're still waiting for His Majesty's government to publish their intentions around where they go for construction products. Okay, Paul Morrell was commissioned to undertake an independent review of the construction product testing regime, and him and Annalise Day published last April their report. We await next steps from HMG, typically being led by Deluc. We support them in that activity as well as many others, but we are waiting to see what that actually means for the industry. Can't mention transition to 2050 and net zero. No matter where government might be when they look at the costs and moving dates of certain provisions, maybe in terms of electric vehicles, etc. But BSI and many others are also moving apace in the world of net zero. Whether we're looking at energy efficiency retrofit, whether we're looking in the realms of certain aspects of carbon abatement and management, there's lots that went on last year, not least the publication of PAS 2080, which Claire will touch upon, but also low carbon concrete too. Can't not mention a slide around AI. From our perspective, collectively as a nation, I think we got to see generally the landing and mainstreaming of AI in society. Unbelievably powerful tool if used correctly, but what does it mean for the built environment? BSI are undertaking work now looking at how we can use AI laying across our standards portfolio, but Dan will touch upon some of that in his session very shortly. And then finally, UK interest rates capping out at 5.25% meant that had a knock-on effect for our industry. It's a challenging set of economic circumstances. We saw construction starts down. It was a hard road in 2023, and we need to see how best we can climb out of that in 2024. Next slide, please. I think just from this takeaway of this slide, from a BSI perspective, the built environment is defined as a collection of man-made or induced physical objects located in a particular area or region. We touch virtually everything. The built environment sector has distinct industries: design and construction, FM, and manufacturing of construction products. They're big numbers. Construction output is 187 billion in the UK alone. We are quite a small player on the international marketplace, but we're a very important player within the UK, some 6 to 8% GDP. And of course, I would always pull out the likes of construction products, amounting to about £63 billion worth of that overall value. From our perspective, yes, focus, and Claire will touch upon this, on energy-related aspects. About 30% of global energy-related carbon emissions come down to buildings. That makes us a big problem that we need to address. When you take into account embodied carbon and similar, it's nearer 40% of emissions come down to the built environment. And yes, notwithstanding, we see horrors like the Grenfell Tower tragedy and similar, we are typically highly regulated. Maybe not as effective as it should be, but we're typically highly regulated. Next slide, please. And just to finish, that snapshot for 2023. Bizarrely, given how hard it was, there was still an uplift in output. 187 billion pounds was the output from between December and November 2023. That's up 7 billion. But what I draw out from here in particular is a massive slowdown in public non-housing in terms of buildings, and a huge uplift again, the big green sector there, in repair and maintenance, where we're seeing people focus that, okay, we might not be going through construction starts, but what can we do with our existing stock and where do we go? And for me, that's a massive opportunity for energy efficiency retrofit, which I'm sure Claire will touch upon next. So that's enough of me. Over to you, Claire.
Thanks, and thanks very much. So I'm Claire Price. I'm one of the sector leads in the built environment team. My focus is very much on sustainability of the built environment in a changing climate. So I'm looking at areas around net zero, the carbon issue, environmental impacts on the built environment, looking at adaptation and resilience as well. And the focus is on buildings and infrastructure, both new build and retrofit as well. So if we can move on to my slide, please. But today I'm going to focus on these three key areas. That a lot is happening in these areas, looking at energy efficiency retrofit, low carbon infrastructure, and those on important environmental impacts, which is pretty new. for us. First of all, on the left-hand side, the energy efficiency retrofit work. This has been going on for quite some time now. We're really changing this industry, increasing activity in this sector of retrofit. PAS 2035 and 2030, the retrofitting dwellings for improved energy efficiency documents have been around for some time. We published a major revision last autumn in September, and that's been very widely picked up. We had a very successful webinar on it, and a large number of people registered. The standards are now out there. There is a long transition period of 18 months. So that takes us to March 2025. But it should be said that we do expect industry to adopt the new standards as soon as possible. And really the long transition is to allow for existing projects to continue using the 2019 version. It also gives time for UCAS and Trustmark to modify their processes, and as well for certification bodies to modify their processes as well around the 2030 new version. So there's information on the Trustmark site about that. Also, always check with your certification bodies to ensure that you're in good time. It will go quickly. Make a timely transition to the requirements of the new standards. We are on regular updates with these documents, and certainly looking at an amendment starting this year on innovation and innovative products. PAS 2038, which is retrofitting non-domestic buildings for improved energy efficiency. It has been around since 2021. We are reviewing it this year, and we're very keen to hear from anyone who's used the standard. Any feedback is welcome. You can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can go that way, or through to a general BSI email address. It should find its way to me if it's on PAS 2038, because we do want to actually engage with industry this year on that document and what needs to be done with it to improve it. I think in terms of future challenges in this area, competence is a key one. Obviously, all the work that'll be picked up later on that building safety and competence aspect. Retrofit professionals need to start to work out what competence looks like in that area. There's a lot happening in this area. The National Retrofit Hub was set up last year. We are members, BSI are members of the hub. We sit on the advisory panel. We're feeding into the strategy of that work and engaging with their working groups as well. We'll be at the National Retrofit Conference at Future Build this year. I hope to see you there. I'll be chairing a session on Wednesday the 6th, and I'm a judge on the awards as well, so we'll be there on the evening of the 5th of March as well. And just a quick pick up on BS 40104, which is our retrofit assessment standard, a new standard being developed, which we expect to come out for public consultation soon, next month, I think. So do look out for that one. So moving on to low carbon infrastructure, as Anne said, yes, PAS 2080, that was published last spring. Another really important document, almost 6,000 downloads when I last heard about that, just before Christmas. So very well thought of. There is guidance as well, which is available through the Institution of Civil Engineers. We have an adoption, the adoption is ongoing. Industry is picking up the standard. There is verification available, but it's not a condition of compliance with the standard. The standard is open about that, but there is a verification service that BSI runs, but other organisations also do verification against PAS 2080. We are looking at elevating the PAS to ISO for its next iteration. We haven't started on that yet. There are ongoing discussions around where that will sit. There's some admin issues around which committee it will sit with nationally and internationally. But we are looking at that. And I think it'd be a really important ISO document, international document. On low carbon materials, lower carbon concrete is the key activity for us at the moment. BSI Flex 350, which is actually alternative binder systems for lower carbon concrete. It is a code of practice. Version 1 was issued last year. Version 2 is about to start this year. I think it'll probably be out in the middle of this year. So do look out for that. It can be used, it can be commented upon, and you know, we welcome feedback on that once it's issued. There is a long-term view to for version 3 ultimately to become BS 8500 Part 3. You may know BS 8500 are our standards for concrete, for specifying concrete and the constituent materials of concrete. Parts 1 and 2 were both revised last year to increase the range of cementitious materials, which so the changes are there to help lower embodied carbon in concrete. They've incorporated pozzolanic materials mainly for use with Portland cement. So that whole industry is really trying to move towards lowering the carbon on concrete, which is a major issue. So climate resilience is obviously becoming really important. So the National Infrastructure Commission, as you may know, published its National Infrastructure Assessment report last year. A lot of industry is really engaging with that report and looking at how they can respond to it. It's got a large number of recommendations, including recommendation 31 for the government to work with BSI and other standards bodies to identify and update core technical engineering standards to factor in future climate change. So there is some ongoing discussion that we're having with the NIC around that, and we'll be engaging with industry on that as well. Adaptation pathways is another area we're looking at here. This is a discussion for an adaptation pathways specifically for infrastructure. This would enhance the existing standard BS 8631 using adaptation pathways for decision making, and actually develop that further for infrastructure needs. So there's going to be a lot happening here for 2024, particularly around the resilience of assets, talking with the Institution of Civil Engineers, the National Infrastructure Commission, the Met Office, of course, who are looking at climate modelling, which will be the big impact to really take resilience forward, and engaging with government as well, the Cabinet Office, who runs a sort of cross-departmental group looking at this. All right, and I'll move on to the environmental impacts work now, and what we're looking at here. So biodiversity net gain is really pretty much a new area for the built environment team, although BSI has been looking at biodiversity and biodiversity net gain on the sustainability side for some time, so more horizontally, more broadly. Looking at this area, and there's activity in ISO international standards as well here. But the new regulations that are impacting the built environment this year is this requirement for 10% uplift, which is being implemented imminently. So 10% uplift of biodiversity net gain in all building projects, including large infrastructure projects. So we are looking at what the implications are for industry and how we can help. Existing standard BS 4 2020, which is a code of practice for planning and development for biodiversity, is being revised this year. So we'll be working with that group and that committee looking at that. There is some other work we're doing with DEFRA on nature markets, and BSI Flex 702, which is also starting this year, is covering requirements for UK biodiversity schemes. So it's all about the verification and accuracy of schemes. So really sort of protecting the industry so that and users really, so that we know that there isn't the greenwashing, that these schemes are verified, and that they can be verified and assessed properly. Quickly on flood resilience, 851188 is being reviewed this year. That is requirements for flood resistant products, but that wider resilience aspect, so the resistance and recovery from flood, is going to be considered as well this year. So yes, we're going to be engaging with DEFRA, increasing that engagement with DEFRA and the Environment Agency, and most importantly with the industry itself, looking at this biodiversity aspect. So we are looking to discuss that with you. So I think that's probably enough from me. There's a lot going on, and I will now hand over to my colleague Dan.
Thank you, Claire. Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Dan Rossiter, and typically the topics I get involved with are on the data, digital side of things. So what I'll briefly talk to you about is some of the key activities that are happening in that space. Sam, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So there's some interesting things happening in this space. Anne's already kindly touched upon some of the other activity we're doing, which include supporting the Bridge AI program. So there's a lot happening around the artificial intelligence space. But outside of that, sort of the three kind of focus activities, one is the continual support of BIM, building information modeling, and the way that we're trying steadily transitioning to information management in that space. So from a formal standards point of view, work is underway to finalize and publish ISO 19650 Part 6, which is the health and safety and risk assessment side of the 19650 series. Those of you who are involved in projects and doing BIM will know that we have PAS 1192 Part 6, which is the last of the national content that hasn't yet been formalized through to ISO. So hopefully that will get published, and in doing so then we'll have the entire series then as international standards, which will then be adopted by CEN, adopted by us, hopefully available to you at the end of the year. At the same time, and it shudders me to say it, it's been 5 years since 19650 Parts 1 and Parts 2 were published, and as such, it's at the point now to consider the review to understand whether they should be kept, modified, or improved in some capacity. And as part of that systematic review, that work is happening at the moment. I in fact think this afternoon is one of the key meetings where we're discussing some of the comments of how to take that forward. So, you know, pay attention, similar to how Claire said, on things like social media, LinkedIn and other places to keep up to date with some of the changes and things that are happening in that space. One of the key drivers from a BIM point of view has been the information management mandate. Originally, we had the BIM level 2 mandate and around that 2013 sort of space targeting for 2016. And then we had most recently the IM mandate, which was back of the TIP roadmap to 2030. In continuing doing that, the Construction Leadership Council is looking at that mandate to determine whether it's still relevant and whether it needs to be updated. So that work is taking place, which could impact in several of these areas. And we've seen a lot of work happening in the space around the Building Safety Act and what's happening there, and particularly the relationship between information management and the golden thread. And we're looking at what are the standards needed to support the golden thread, as well as how to deal with some of the frictions that are appearing in the sector. One example friction, for example, is that we have a standardized file naming convention in the 19650 series, but we've been told by people who are trying to submit content for the gateway reviews as part of working with the Building Safety Regulator that they don't accept hyphens for the names as you upload files. And it's trying to resolve those sorts of frictions to make it easier for the sector to do their work is a key focus for this year. And in doing so, continuing our engagement with some key players. This includes people like the Construction Leadership Council, NEMA, formerly the UK BIM Alliance, and our work of maintaining and convening the UK BIM framework. Focusing on more future-facing activities, there's the work that's happening around digital twins and cyber physical systems. Notably, this isn't just in the built environment per se, and it kind of ekes out into some of those other sectors that Ant mentioned earlier. Some examples particularly are into the energy sector, where there's a lot of interesting work happening around the kind of digital twin of virtual energy systems, as well as how cyber physical systems interact with things like high value manufacturing, transport, and other areas as well. So it's starting to become a lot more cohesive in that sort of space. Just before Christmas, ISO 30172 was published, which includes use cases for digital twins, and due out by the spring this year should be 30173, which is terminology and high-level concepts for digital twins more generally. Now, what I'll point out is this is digital twins for any sector, so it is very high level, but it establishes those key characteristics and principles for any digital twin. So it's going to be some useful reading that will form the backbone for any work that we do specific for the built environment. Some of the positive kind of drivers in this space include the fact that the National Digital Twin Programme, which is doing a lot of piloting on the Isle of Wight and in other bits and pieces, published their principles just after Christmas. So you're able to go to the Gov website and see the principles behind their programme, and they are, fairly akin to what people have seen before from the Gemini principles and others. And we're hoping as BSI to support that work and build out to establish which standards support those principles and to do some follow-on work around that. And there's been a lot of work on cyber physical systems and cyber physical infrastructure from places like the Connected Places Catapult, who we are engaging with to see how that work is progressing and whether standards can play a part in that. And of course, I sit on the Community Council for the Digital Twin Hub and are engaging as much as I can with the DT Hub itself. Excuse me for 1 second. Very cold. And then finally, in this space, we're focusing a lot at the moment on modern methods of construction. Quite excitedly, last year, we started CB 301, which is the National Committee focused on modern methods of construction, and work is progressing fairly significantly around PAS 8700, which is sponsored by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, which focuses on the processes needed to support the creation of residential buildings, considering modern methods of construction. And as this draft develops, it looks at the various kind of life cycle stages and what are the considerations and processes needed to augment it to ensure that modern methods can be applied in a fairly frictionless way. So once published, that will be a fairly key standard to support and catalyze NMC going forward. Some really good work was published last year around the definition framework, where you get the various different categories for modern methods of construction, and they're being considered quite well, and for example are cited in PAS 8700, while a significant kind of challenge has been trying to consider how we resolve the relationship between traditional building and modern methods of construction. Back in 2019, we published a white paper that discussed this in more detail, but there's a bit of a dichotomy where in some areas we know that modern methods can achieve far greater tolerances and accuracy levels, but at the same time it's not fair to hold traditional construction to that level. But so how do we resolve the inclusivity of trying to incorporate modern methods in with traditional from a good practice point of view? We can't duplicate all of our standards and have traditional standards and modern method standards, but at the same time, how do we recognize that there are improvements in some of those areas in the way that we go forwards? So it's a very careful discussion that's been had in places like CB 301. And of course, engaging in that, we are members of Build Offsite and engage with the various government departments and others in this space as well. So there's an awful lot going on, but these are hopefully some of the priorities in that kind of data digital technology space. And in closing that off, I will hand over to the final member of the team, Ian. Over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. So my name is Ian Richardson. I'm the third of the sector leads in the built environment team at BSI. You can probably go to the next slide, please, Sam. So I've worked at BSI for a long time, but moved into the built environment team in the last few years. And the areas I'm going to focus on this morning are the very simple and straightforward topics of competency in construction products. There's a lot going on. What I would say is what's equally as important as this webinar is staying engaged with us, and we'll probably cover a bit more of that in some of the final slides that Anne will go through. But we're talking about a few minutes, almost seconds, just going through what's an enormous amount of activity across everybody's subjects. And we can only cover so much from a high level point of view. So there's so much more behind all of these slides. So I really encourage everybody to stay engaged with us, whether it's through our website or through our webinars or contacting us direct. So taking competency first, the frameworks that are in place now, the conversion of Flex 8670 to a full British standard has begun. That will become BS 8670 Part 1, which is core criteria for building safety and competence frameworks. That had its DPC last year, and it's aiming to publish in the next few months. We've already got the PASs there, the three PASs, 8671, 2 and 3. Those PASs for principal designer, principal contractor and management of safety in residential buildings are now part of the new technical committee for competency called CPB1. They have a pipeline to look at all of these standards. The 2-year review of those is about to happen, and we anticipate they will transition to British Standard 2. So that national suite of competence standards is beginning to build. So that leads us into the future activity, because we now have conversations happening within the industry and within the technical committee to talk about how we expand upon the 3 that we already have. So the PAS or a British standard you've got there on organisational capability. I put TBC there because it is at a very early discussion stage, but this is sort of being led at the moment by the Building Safety Alliance, who are trailblazing this particular topic. They hope to publish their own sort of draft industry document in the coming months, and we have agreement that will come into BSI's process, which is why, if I was anticipating when either that PAS or British standard would come into force, it would be later this year or early 2025. We've got 8674 also coming through, framework for competence of individual fire risk assessors, that will publish next year. And as Claire mentioned briefly in her presentation, between sustainability and competency, we're also looking at other standardization needs, such as competence for sustainability professionals. We talked about CPB1. It must be the week for activity because they met yesterday, and an enormous amount going on. Shout out to the chair and members of CPB1 who have got an incredible strategic plan and engagement plan, looking at its positioning and alignment, both legislation and wider activity. So the link now between what is the ICSG Industry Competence Steering Group, transitioning from the Competency Steering Group, and how it's really important for us to engage with that group and everything that it's trying to do. The new chair of that is Hannah Clark from CPA. So when we talk about engagement, naturally that's OPSS or Department for Business and Trade. We've got the Department for Levelling Up, but also the Building Safety Regulator. And then we've mentioned the Building Safety Alliance and the work they're doing with us, but also ICSG, Construction Industry Council, and the ICC. So again, remarkable amount going on. And even yesterday, there was the press release from the Construction Industry Council, their third report from the Competence Steering Group, urging industry to embrace new standards and frameworks, setting out group's future. So this report, as I said, the press release for that was issued yesterday. Higher Bar, Achieving a Competence-Led Built Environment. That report was published and can now be downloaded for free. And that sets out the significant steps being made across the built environment and fire sectors to improve skills, knowledge and behaviours, and to drive culture change and improve the safety of buildings. So I definitely encourage you to go and seek that out. So moving on to construction products, a lot of regulatory reform happening in both Europe and the UK. As Ant mentioned, Building Safety Act came into force and the regulation that's come behind that. But it mentions in the Act about additional requirements for a list of safety critical products, and that's yet to be determined. So lots of conversations happening within our committees and industry groups about how that can be defined alongside the general safety requirement as well. What will come up a lot is the Testing for a Safer Future report. Morell Day published report, and Paul Morell appeared at the Select Committee giving evidence, as did Lee Rowley MP. Some of you may well have seen that evidence given post Grenfell, and that expands into future activities. So we expect the revision of the European Construction Products Regulation to happen very soon. We're balancing that with a potential consultation from the Department for Levelling Up on UK construction products regulatory reform, and that's anticipated very shortly, we hope. And finally, a new BS again that matches competency and construction products. So BS 8670 Part 2, core criteria for construction product competence, and that should hopefully publish next year. And our engagement on that front again, so we've worked very closely with the OPSS construction products regulator, looking to support them with their policy, but also enforcement. 440 construction products designated standards, and looking at the whole matrix of compliance that is involved with that and all its normative referencing. Regular meetings with the Department for Levelling Up about their construction products reform, as I say, awaiting that potential consultation. And also our ongoing conversations, recommendations that happened in the Morell report, looking at BSI's role as the national standards body, how we need to work closer with government, but also how do we handle the future of construction product designated standards. The new potential designated standards that come through at the moment, there's a copy and paste of European harmonised standards. How do we manage that and propose new designated standards in the future? Looking at the test methods for construction products, standards that may need to be revised, and there's a very, very detailed review of that happening within BSI at the moment, and that will continue, and communication will happen, all very hypothetical at the moment, and lots of work to be done within our committees there. And of course, the building safety regulator, HSE, working very closely with them, as you'll no doubt hear more from Ant's section. And I just draw your attention finally to a piece of work under the umbrella of the Construction Leadership Council, where they're compiling an industry response to the recommendations from the Morell Day report. And it's hoped that will be published in the coming months. So I sit as chair of one of those working groups looking at test methods and standards within that project. And as I say, they will look at relevant recommendations and then industry response to each of them. So as I say, an enormous amount going on, just a whistle-stop view of those, but we will continue to communicate through further webinars on both those topics in the coming months. So Anne, I've whipped through that very quickly, but I'll hand back to you for the remaining part of health and safety.
That's great. Thank you, Ian. Excellent. Again, just to finish up in terms of health and safety with a particular focus on fire and structural design. Next slide, please. I am mindful of the time because I probably took too long at the start. So I'm going to move through these quite quickly because I'm really keen to get to Q&A with the team. So in terms of fire safety, some areas I think you might want to be aware of. We currently have British Standard 4422 out there at the moment. It's on public consultation. It sets out the vocabulary for use in fire safety in the built environment. So often we move straight into guidance and specifications in fire safety, but we don't always hang back and think about vocabulary and the broad intentions and concepts. So that's out for consultation. So please do take the time to have a look at that. A very important standard or part of a suite of standards is BS 5839. Part 1, which is fire detection and alarm systems in non-domestic premises, is actually going to come out for a full revision and out for consultation this February. It's a hugely important document that is actually utilised not just in the UK but around the globe. So it's going through a full revision. It's out for public consultation in February. The sorts of things it's looking at is how you undertake extensions to alarm systems and some more simplified guidance on positioning of call points and the use of different types of detectors in rooms in which people sleep. So a really big and important guidance document. Another one of those is Treble 91. So this is fire safety in the design, management and use of residential buildings. Probably the largest amount of comments we've ever received through public consultation came in for this document. It's again a very important document that's utilised. Quite often it's utilised as an alternative to approved document B, fire safety for the English building regulations. The amazing steering committee, the panel going through these comments is working unbelievably hard to actually update that document and respond to comments received. Of course, given everything post-Grenfell, there's a lot happening in this space, and we're mindful too that the regulator, certainly in England, has confirmed that they're going to want two-stair provision in such high-rise buildings in the future, set at 18 metres, and we need to contend and see how that works with going forward and what guidance we can give in Treble 91, which, as I say, so that should be out. You should expect it around summer this year, and we fully intend to do a full promotional sort of push for that. But also we intend, and the internal team who are working very hard on that too, they're going to publish probably early before the actual publication the broad changes that are taking place and similar. You won't be surprised in terms of the challenges and drivers that we're looking at. We need to further support implementation of the new building safety regime as we move forward, and we have now obviously have the new building safety regulator under the auspices of the HSE, but we need to support them going through and industry at large. And of course, we still await the Grenfell inquiry final report. Latest suggestions from the inquiry on timings might be around Q2 of this year. They've got an awful lot to get through, but no doubt they'll be cognizant as well of the upcoming 7th anniversary for Grenfell on the 14th of June this year. So we need to see what recommendations they make from that and what response BSI might need to make therein. In terms of fire safety in existing buildings, one that we get asked an awful lot about is what's happening to the replacement of PAS 79-2, which is around fire risk assessment for housing. It's a code of practice. Well, you'll be glad to hear that BS 9792 is just out now for public consultation. It should be there for you to have on our standards portal for you to actually have a look at and to comment upon. It is a full revision and it includes updating guidance relating to people with specific evacuation requirements. We'll be aware of discussions around the use of PEEPs and similar in the past, but there's a new narrative that's been provided here that is out as draft form for consultation. So please do take the time to have a look at that. For those of you that get involved in existing buildings and the fire performance of external cladding systems and wall construction, certainly in existing blocks of flats, PAS 9980, hugely important document used for the appraisal of such cladding systems. Something around 9,000 downloads, I believe, has been undertaken. Again, not just in the UK. That's coming up for its 2-year review. So discussions have started already as to what that review might look like, what needs to be done, what could be improved, what more might it need to do. So again, similar drivers, response to the Grenfell inquiry, but also there's a big body of work, and I've just come off a call with the building safety regulator that they've undertaken with public funding in the realm of R&D in the fire safety space. It covers a myriad of areas that will start to come online as well, publication, and there'll be aspects of BSI with our all-important committee experts will need to undertake and support. There might be new standards, there'll be evidence for review, so that'll be really important too. And then finally, I can't not mention the Eurocodes. The Eurocodes are a set of technical standards setting out how structural design should be undertaken, initially at a European level because it's emanated from CEN, but again, it's being used around the world. Generation 1 came out, started being published in the early noughties. Well, a heck of a lot of work has been undertaken on Generation 2, and actually we've already started publishing the new Eurocodes. The rest will be published now out to 2026. There's a lot of documents supporting national annexes of how you actually implement them and land them in the UK will follow suit, and ultimately we'll withdraw what is Generation 1 Eurocodes on the 30th of March on 2028. So quite a bit of distance out, but there's a lot to take in there if you work within the realm of structural design, but it's coming, and we'll put some more webinars in place to tell people about that. In terms of the challenge and the driver for that, very much an evolution of content. enhance ease of use, and achieving even more international consensus. And TC250, the committee in charge of that, have been phenomenal as its chair as well, Dr. Steve Denton, in terms of taking that through. So that's a whistle stop. There's lots more happening in the fire space as well, but that's probably the particular highlights. Next slide, please. I promised as well in my introduction that I would just touch upon our webinar program with huge support from our events team. We had a really successful run of webinars in 2023, some 8,000 people registered for our webinars, which is fantastic, which is why we want to keep doing that. For the year ahead, we've already got some key dates in place. There they are before you. You'll get these slides. But again, further look at competence, construction products, can't not consider net zero, energy efficiency retrofit, and we'll look to put something in place for that 9991. And I'm really glad to announce that we continue our partnership with the IFE, the Institution of Fire Engineers, where we'll be looking to do 3 or 4 webinars this year and maybe something face-to-face, who knows? So we'll see where we get to. Next slide, please. So on that basis, can I kindly draw my colleagues back? Come on, turn your cameras and certainly your voices back on, and we'll try and cover off in the last 9 minutes that we've got left some questions that we've had come through, and we've had quite a few through. So I've had some previously, but some new ones come on whilst listening today, so let's work through them. I'm going to take host priority and answer the first one, if that's all right, but colleagues by all means jump in. I had a really good question from Olu, who is asking about how is BSI collaborating or intends to collaborate with higher education institutions to bring awareness of the organisation's activities and students in preparing them for the marketplace. That's a stunning question. I'm really, I've taken this one on as well because we have a really good answer there. We're very lucky. We have a long-time colleague, Matt Charles. He's our Educational Development Manager, and that is his sole job, to outreach and engage with universities, further education colleges and similar, because we see that as so important. We also have a university partnership program in place where we work with particular universities where there are particular areas of consideration and expertise wanting to be developed, maybe, for example, in medical devices. And we also have a lecture program. I've certainly lectured at universities. I know Dan has as well. And, we're called upon. And so that happens, and we want that to continue to happen. And in terms of access to our standards, it's my understanding from certainly from last year that our universities have direct access to our standards content as well, again, to make it more available. So great question, that one from me. Okay, in terms of thinking about what we've got before us here, I think one that's come in, which is really for Claire, touching upon your area, Claire. The question is, clearly, present construction design problems are related to environmental matters, temperature extremes, drainage capacities, and wind. Are there BSI plans afoot to update standards related to the climate environment?
Yeah, thank you, Ant. Yes, this very much ties into what I mentioned about climate adaptation and resilience. We are pretty much at the beginning of this process. We haven't yet framed a standard solution, but clearly we need to understand how you might define resilience. What is a resilient building or piece of infrastructure? What is a process to make it so actually to design and deliver a resilient building that's new, but also to look at all of our existing assets and what that might look like. We need to understand all of that and then see all of the standards that already exist that might need to be amended, revised, changed to actually incorporate these new requirements to ensure that our portfolio of standards can also work for industry to ensure that our assets are climate resilient.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. One for Dan. We'll maybe do it running order broadly. Dan, how is artificial intelligence influencing the built environment sector?
Well, with 6 minutes to go, I don't think you want me to take all 6 minutes. I think it's a funny topic, and those of you might have seen it. There was a great, I think, LinkedIn marketing campaign, which was the "Hey ChatGPT, finish building this building for me." And I think there's certainly some resistance, I think, in the way it's coming in, and I think it ultimately falls down onto the space of we need good data to do our things, and there's the flashy magpie silverness of it, of going, well, this is great, we can chuck everything into a large language model, we can ask it a bunch of questions, we'll get a bunch of answers. But then the problem is the trustworthiness, the reliabilityness of some of that information is where it starts to come down. I think that's where we're going to need to slow down and prepare for some of this. And it's really interesting when you look at some of the use cases that Innovate UK were talking about for the Bridge AI program, because one of them, as an example, was, could we chuck all the project information into like a ChatGPT sort of thing, and then ask it questions, because it's quicker than ringing the architect, finding out they're not available, waiting a couple of days to get the answer. I think I nearly fainted at that idea, because when you consider design liabilities and all these sorts of, so I think it's a very interesting space of where we write "do not scale" on a drawing because we're scared of people measuring off of the drawing. What could the artificial intelligence pull out that we don't mean it to cause issues? So it's a fascinating space, and I think it's just keep an eye on the work we're doing with Bridge AI, which is looking at not just construction but in other spaces, as we look to work out what are proportionate and appropriate use cases for the built environment, and then what support they might need. But it's a very new emerging area to make sure we do it carefully and do it properly.
No, absolutely. I mean, we can't forget also that we're one of the most litigious areas or sectors in the UK as well. So, I mean, that's hugely important too. Thank you, Dan. Ian, in terms of this particular area around competencies, question we have before us here is, how do you best ensure companies are valuing and embracing staff competencies in the construction industry?
Yeah, very good question. Thanks, Anne. Yes, and thanks for asking that. So there's probably, Dan says very quickly, a couple of aspects to that. I mean, we've had the Flex and PAS documents for some time looking at particular job titles, and that whole pipeline of competency standards to help the industry is growing. One of them I would say that has an enormous amount of support, although it's still to be defined in terms of what type of standard it is and whether there is assurance around it. And the pros and cons of that is the organizational capability standard. So a management system standard potentially with requirements for that organization to show its competency within the organization. I think that's the natural progression of that suite of standards. The other part of that is, of course, and I talked about it in my presentation, is about the engagement that needs to happen. It's an amazing amount of debate that is happening within that industry at the moment, and the groups that are doing an incredible amount, all the working groups under the ICSG, doing some amazing stuff. And I think what has very widespread support at the moment is the idea of some sort of competency hub, a web platform that would allow us to have that type of debate and engagement, and place signpost and host all sorts of documents online under BSI's competency hub that would allow that sort of question and answer to be live amongst the industry itself, that you can look at what standards exist, but also best ways of implementing and supporting each other on that journey. So, part of me thinks half of this maybe is standards development, but actually as much of it is awareness and guidance around it. And I think that's very apparent from what CPB1 is trying to do. So look out for those in the coming months and years.
Brilliant, thank you. Look, thank you all. Timings have conspired against us forevermore. Robert's asked a question online about availability of this recording and the slides. Yes, you can get them, Robert. Sorry you're late joining us, so we can do that. I'm going to have to draw this now to a close. Hopefully you found this really helpful. We really enjoyed delivering this, and we do use it as a useful platform for outreach and similar. As Claire's touched upon, we're all on LinkedIn. At the end of this slide deck, we actually also have our direct emails within BSI. So don't hesitate to approach us. There they are. I think with the 30 or so seconds left available to me, I just want to say a huge thank you to yourselves for coming forward today. I know you're busy professionals, so to join us for an hour during the day, thank you. I want to say a big thank you to my amazing sector team, Ian, Claire and Dan. Thank you for all that you continue to do. And lastly, I want to say a really big thank you as well to the events team that make this all happen. We've got Sam and Andrew behind the scene, but there's also a bigger team there. So have a great rest of the day. I look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Take care for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.